Invincible Season 1 is a new superhero animated show based off the comic by Robert Kirkman. If you're unfamiliar, Robert Kirkman created the Walking Dead comics, which became the hit television show. So I was very excited because I've actually read all of The Walking Dead and all of Invincible. I think there's like 26 volumes, I believe, around the 25 or 26 volumes of the comic. I've been following the comic for the last couple years, and it's really great. If you're unfamiliar, Invincible tells the story of Mark Grayson. He is a teenager. His father is Omni-Man, a sort of Superman-like character on the world. The world is very tongue-in-cheek in terms of the tone. There's a lot of, like creatures, monster attacks, demons, aliens, all the whole shebang. It's a crazy world we live in where people can die at any moment because of the high danger nature of threats, and there's always superheroes to help. So Omni-Man helps out the Guardians of the Globe. They're like the Justice League, and Mark doesn't have powers yet though, and he might never actually get powers, so he's kind of worried because he's a late bloomer. Him and his mom, they all live in a house together, and he's got friends. He's just an average teenager until he gets his powers, and then his whole world changes because now he's got to learn to fly. He's got to learn the responsibilities of being a superhero because he wants to be like his father. However, something happens in the first episode, the big twist, the sort of subversion of the whole superhero coming-of-age storyline becomes a lot different. So enough about the comic. Let's talk about the TV show. The TV show is excellent. I mean, any like viewer watching the first episode in its entirety will probably be hooked by the episode's end. If not, then the show is not for you. The show is a little bit violent, but it's matching the tone of the comic. The executive producers is Robert Kirkman's one of them, but also Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. They also adapted Preacher for AMC. So the Preacher comic book, I've read that. The show is very different, but it keeps the same tone. So since those two did a solid job with Preacher, obviously Amazon Prime was like, yes, come on over and adapt another property ripe for the adaptation. So they do a really good job with Invincible. I believe the first season covers the first maybe 3 or 4 trade paperbacks. So it's definitely not rushing things. It's taking its time building up the world. The first episode is sort of, introduction of all the characters and the main plot that's going to happen throughout the whole season. Episode 2 introduces a new threat that keeps coming back, one of my personal favorites. So there are these green-skinned aliens called the Flaxans that keep showing up because they live in another dimension and they keep invading. And then the third episode, fourth, they introduce some other things. They also introduce some threats that aren't fully closed off. They're going with the comic book style because, in the comics you can introduce elements and sort of leave them off for later. The TV show is trying not to blow its load way too fast. So it introduces some elements that will become, a threat to, or they'll have to be addressed later in future seasons. So I like how it doesn't try too hard to rush things. But incredible voice acting. The voice acting is phenomenal. I mean, you got your main 3, which are solid, but then I couldn't quite place all of the voice actors without looking, so it's nice to show that at least they match. They got some heavy hitters in there. There's some really famous people in there that I really liked, and they didn't spare any expense on the voice acting for sure. Animation wise, yep, the animation's pretty solid for the most part. There are some obvious CGI moments, but it's like spaceships and school buses, stuff that doesn't really matter. I didn't really care. But overall, the animation is pretty solid for the action sequences. Sometimes they change a few things here and there. I noticed that they skipped a couple of plot points from the first trade paperback because it wasn't that important. But then, when they're fighting someone smaller, there's still a lot of action, like Doc Seismic. He's like kind of like a C-list villain guy with these I can basically control earthquakes, and there's like this huge extended sequence. So also the Mauler twins get a nice, a lot of screen time. I like them. They're a fan favorite. They're like really hard to describe the villains, but there's a lot of colorful villains, heroes, all sorts of cool things. I really like the voice acting for Robot, and I like Cecil. You know, he's like the shadowy government spook that has to control everything. He's the type of person that would like abandon you if you were fighting a monster in space, and there was a small chance, or there's a large chance that, you know, the monster would kill you. He would nuke both of you. That's the type of man he is. He controls these this giant organization that stops threats and uses superheroes and things like that. The series will rock you emotionally. There's a lot of great voice acting and animation, but the really interesting thing that people don't know is that this first season, if you thought this first season was like balls to the wall crazy, then you need to strap in for the future seasons, because I believe this show has been renewed for seasons 2 and 3, and this season is just the tip of the iceberg. If you think this is like, oh man, such amazing revelations, there are some insane threats and story arcs and bombastic world-ending events that will happen, especially in season 2, because my favorite volume, the one that made me hooked into the comics, was volume 5. And that's like right on the edge of, you know, what this season sort of covered. So season 2 will have some slam bang moments, at least 1 or 2. I don't know if they'll go all the way to the end. There's some craziness happening near the end of trade paperback, I think 10 or 11. Some big stuff. So I don't know if they'll use all of those, but you know, I think with the way they're going with the source material, they can go for a solid 4 to 6 seasons. So Invincible is definitely worth your time. It is, you know, as someone who's read the comic, I still enjoyed it. Newcomers can also enjoy it too and get into the comics after if they want to, but you know, it definitely keeps the tone and the heart and the family dynamics intact. So it's an excellent series to get into. I definitely recommend Invincible, probably exclusively only on Amazon Prime.